analytics and data warehousing. So I'm just going to give you a quick update of where we are in terms of analytics and data warehousing at SAP for 2020. All right. So before I get into the product portfolio, I just wanted to give a bit of an overview as to where these analytics and data warehousing products fall in. Now, in your normal organization, you would have your core systems, which is your ERP system. In this case, let's say S4HANA, right? Or you could also have an ERP system that is not an SAP system. And you can have other applications that are SAP and non-SAP, but you still get data from those applications. Now, from these core applications that you use to run your business, what you require from those is for you to be able to do your daily business operations, for you to do a simple analysis of those daily operations. And now going forward, we're now embedding some machine learning and predictive analysis into the processes to make them more intelligent and optimize them. Now, what do we mean by an integrated data infrastructure? Now, with all of these applications surrounding us, we require a place where we can combine all of this data. There's a place where we can now do a complex business analysis, such as, for example, currency conversions for those companies that have entities in different countries, a place where you can have a view of your historical data against your actual data. And the main importance of this is to separate your workloads, because your operational system needs to be running and its uptime needs to be at 100%. So you need a place where you can separate and be able to do your complex analysis, and then the other place where you can do your operations, right? Now, this is where now this integrated data infrastructure comes in as your hub for your data and as a way to view all of this data. Now, in the SAP Business Intelligence portfolio, we currently have two key solutions, and this is SAP Analytics Cloud and Business Objects BI Suite. Now, SAP Analytics Cloud is our strategic direction for our analytics platform. And we call it an analytics platform because it's not just comprised of business intelligence, but on top of that, we have the planning, we have the augmented analytics capability, and we also have the ability to build applications, analytic applications. And we have the Business Objects BI Suite to cater for our on-premise enterprise reporting. So this has been our enterprise reporting solution for a number of years, where we've built a lot of experience and we still keep investing in it. Now, while as time goes on, we are trying to drive more cloud adoption, right? But what we are finding is that currently customers still...
Kyk jy na webcast. Kyk jy na webcast, ek sien Jacques de Vrees ook op die call.
Sorry, is that
sorry, Bonnie. Sorry, can everybody just mute themselves? Keep out the noise in the background.
All right. So, as I was mentioned, hello. Hi. Okay. So as I was mentioning that we are trying to drive cloud adoption, but we do know that there's a lot of customers who've made a lot of investment in on-premise BI. And this results in a situation where we see what we call a hybrid situation. So this is customers running the SAP Analytics Cloud and the Business Objects BI Suite side by side. Now, the whole thing about the hybrid approach is that each of these solutions have their own focus areas currently, right? For example, so with SAP Analytics Cloud, we talked about the augmented analytics capability, and there's also the accelerated time to value in terms of the content that the pre-built content that SAP Analytics Cloud comes with. And now on the Business Objects BI Suite side, we have a new release that is coming up. It's currently in beta phase. It should be generally available in Q2 this year. It's also coming with its own enhancements, such as a modernized user interface and some. Sorry, please go on mute. All right, and some capabilities for hybrid user management. So with the knowledge that each of these have their own focus areas, then there's also a need to drive a lot of more interoperability between the two, right? Because as I mentioned before, we are still trying to drive cloud adoption, but we need to be aware of the on-premise investments from our customers. Now, in terms of this interoperability between the two solutions, when we first started with SAP Analytics Cloud, we started off with having a live connectivity between SAP Analytics Cloud and Business Objects. So this connectivity was through the Business Objects universes. And this was a way to ensure that the investment that you've made in your business objects, which is your universes, you can still leverage off of that and not have to start from scratch. And then we continued as well in terms of an Excel or Office type of integration whereby you can access the SAP Analytics Cloud models in Analysis for Office. Now, with the new release that is coming up for Business Objects BI, in line with you leveraging your current investments, so in this instance, this would be your web intelligence documents that you've already created. Now, these can now be a source of data for SAP Analytics Cloud. So you don't have to start from scratch. You just build on your current knowledge base that you already have. And as I also mentioned about the hybrid user management, whereby there will be an API that allows you to provision and to sync the users from your Business Objects platform into SAP Analytics Cloud. And then there's also now where we talk about this Analytics Hub or catalog, where it is a central place for you to access your BI. So Business Objects BI will be published there and be up to date in terms of all the changes that you make on the platform basis. And then you have your SAP Analytics Cloud BI published there as well onto the hub, and also your third-party BI as well. So this is your centralized portal for all your BI applications. Now, in terms of a business intelligence product suite, as I mentioned, just to reiterate, we have Business Objects BI, we have SAP Analytics Cloud. In terms of driving adoption, we are ensuring that there's interoperability for you to leverage all the investments that you have without having to rebuild. And we keep continuously innovating on SAP Analytics Cloud and providing more capabilities for the BI, the planning, the predictive, and the analytic applications, which we have recently actually released a deployment for Android, as that was also quite a big requirement for the analytics designer. All right, thank you. And then now moving on to the data warehousing aspect. Our data warehousing strategy goes as follows, right? So on-premise, we have our SAP BW4 HANA and our SAP SQL Data Warehousing, i.e. SAP HANA. Now the SAP BW4 HANA, what it serves as is our packaged data warehouse, right? So it comes up, you have all your pre-built models, especially from an S4 perspective, and you also have objects that are able to do all shapes and forms of data analysis that you require. Now within BW4 HANA as well, or side by side to BW4 HANA, there's also the SQL data warehousing approach. So we call this sort of a freehand type of start from scratch approach. Now, this is our strategic direction for on-premise data warehousing. And we continuously also innovate on these two platforms, the SQL data warehousing approach and the BW4HANA approach. And now recently, we have introduced a data warehouse as a service, which is called SAP Data Warehouse Cloud. Now, what SAP Data Warehouse Cloud does is it caters for the need to have a faster time to start in terms of your data warehousing. And with the recognition that we still do have customers that do have on-premise investments in SAP BW4 or SAP HANA. Here we also approach this with a hybrid type of approach, whereby the two can be interoperable. So you can use your data warehouse cloud as a way to extend on your on-premise investment. Now, what data warehouse cloud also caters for is for bridging the gap between IT and business in terms of data warehousing. So we find that a lot of business requirements are quite quick, they're quite agile, they come in very quickly. And there's always that stopping phase whereby you have to now move it onto IT and you wait, and this ends up in business frustrations. So we are now bridging that gap and allowing business to actually do some data warehousing aspects, but your complex data warehousing aspects can still sit in your on-premise data warehouse, which is a BW4 or a BW system. So the data warehouse cloud extends those. It also extends the user reach, and it also, sorry, can you please go? Thank you. And it also increases your time to value in that you can start as soon as possible. And it's also a pay per use. So if there's capacity that is being used, then you only pay for that. You don't have to invest on big capacity from start and not even use it at all. So you invest on what you use. All right, I think that is it for me for now. Are there any questions?
Bonnie, thank you very much for that. Just in terms of the Q&A, I think we should have a Q&A now for your session, and then we'll have a separate Q&A for Ben's session afterwards. And what Grid Data have done, who sponsor these SIGs, we have a prize for the best question. We've got a power bank available, so please fire away with the questions, and we'll have a judge available to judge the best one, and we'll send a power bank to you. If you'd like to also ask a question, please just unmute yourself, say your name, and then go ahead with the question.
It's Andre here. Can I ask a question?
Yes.
On the previous slide, you actually had Lumira as one of the little blocks, and I was under the impression that that was being deprecated. Is that still the case or not?
So that is the one that's not going to be shipped with BI 4.3. That is Lumira Discovery. But Lumira Designer for the analytics applications, i.e. Design Studio, that will still be shipped with 4.3.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, this is Nathan here from ShopRite. Quick question on user management and basically authentication and authorization and the likes. Will you guys be catering for like Microsoft users as well, and not just in the SAP ecosystem?
Sorry, so Microsoft?
Yeah, so Active Directory and the likes. So you've normally in organizations got two sets of users. You've got your Microsoft set of users, such as managed by Active Directory, and you have SAP. In terms of integrating those user bases, is there any strategies or is there any tool sets that's being catered for that?
From an SAP Analytics Cloud perspective?
Yes.
Or, From an SAP Analytics Cloud perspective, there is a user management that I think it can leverage off of your Active Directory, but I'd have to check for you. I'm not certain on that.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any more questions from anybody? Okay, great. Bonnie, thank you very much for that very informative presentation. Nathan, you've been judged as the winner of the power bank for the first round of questions. So we'll get your details, we'll get your address and send through your power bank.
Thank you kindly.
Okay. So the next presentation, I'll hand over to Ben Stratum from Glue Data.
Morning, everyone. Thanks for joining. This is quite a good opportunity for us just to present, some information to you regarding data assessments. Specifically, the focus for today will be more on S/4HANA strategy, and we see data assessments as being a key exercise in preparing for S/4HANA. So, I think let's just dive straight in. Just go to the next. Okay, so cool. So let's start by asking, what is a data assessment? So data assessment, quite simply, is a review and analysis of the current state of affairs, okay, specifically relating to data. What we want to do is, deal with any risks and any preparation activities that need to occur or happen before any project or any program kicks off. So in saying that, there's usually a specific focus. Okay, so once we've done the data assessment, or in preparing for the data assessment, we need to sort of decide what is our focus going to be. It's very difficult to try and throw a blanket over everything. We need to have a focus. We need to be targeted in our approach. So we have certain flavors or focus areas for assessments, and these are just examples. These assessments can then be tailored to your specific need. S/4HANA data readiness is one of the more popular ones right now. As we know, we ask questions and answer questions like, what is the state of the data in the legacy system? Does it conform to S/4HANA requirements? Has business dealt with data obsolescence and redundancy, general data quality? Are transformation and enrichment requirements understood and planned for? Has a detailed analysis of source data been completed to inform the data migration object register, which is the migration scope? Have owners and stewards been defined for the relevant data or processes? Following on from that, if they currently own a specific set of data or area within the ECC environment, as an example, and you're moving to S4, they would, by extension, own the S4 area, which means that they need to own the data going from the legacy system to the target system. You can also focus on data quality and governance solutions during assessments. Again, the data ownership and stewardship is part of the conversation there. Are data management KPIs defined? Are they measurable and monitored? Are business processes, workflows, and responsibilities mapped and documented? How does the data management and cleansing integrate into the overarching data roadmap and strategy? And then you can also do assessment, for example, specifically on data preparation. This takes elements out of data quality and readiness, not necessarily for S/4HANA. You might want to prepare for integration of another program or system. Does a data quality management solution exist that enables business to clean and prepare the data? Are business and data rules clearly defined? Are they applied to the relevant data sets? Does an adequate reporting and monitoring mechanism exist to validate and track the data as you clean it? Can you see, the trend line? Can you identify exceptions that you need to deal with? Are both the source and target system structures known and mapped with the relevant transformation rules? So these assessments deal with all of these questions. Okay. So we asked the question, so why do I need to do a data assessment? organizations today, especially, are more and more moving to become more data driven. Most organizations that we deal with are undergoing some sort of a digital transformation. So there's more focus being placed on data in general. You know, we believe that data assessments provide valuable insight to inform these strategic decisions. Okay. S4 HANA migration is only part of your data roadmap. Okay, it's not the entire data roadmap. There are various other components to consider. And what we like about a data assessment is, you know, that you measure the current scenario, but you measure it against the goal, you know, the end state that you'd like to achieve. So there are various benefits. And I mean, this is not an exhaustive list, but we would like to make decisions based on facts, not assumptions. So by doing an assessment, I'm diving into the detail, you know, and figuring out exactly what's going on, rather than, you know, looking at high-level reports or, you know, financial results or anything of that nature to make these decisions. The assessments can assist in setting up these goals, even, you know, the end state that you'd like to achieve for specific stages of the roadmap. You know, you get to grips with the various data sets within the organization. You're making the unknowns known, understanding what is common across these sets. Where's the master, where's the slave, system of record, all of that is better defined. You then reduce the risk to projects, of course, because you are enabling a preparation process. You know, you are reducing the risk to budget overruns and timeline extensions, risk to delivery, because you know, you're looking at things in a measurable and manageable way. You're leveraging industry experience and IP, you know, such as, for example, you know, consultants, or Blue Data has a rules repository where we have thousands of rules. You know, you can very easily go and look at, you know, what are other customers doing, what are examples of rules being applied to certain objects and fields, etc. There are immediate actions. You're finding low-hanging fruit, you know, where you can immediately gain benefit and realize a return from the assessment and the strategy. There are artifacts built during the assessment, you know, such as the report itself. You have a rules master list. You have a data model that you can customize reporting on. You know, and these can be reused in other areas of the data roadmap, in the preparation, etc. They can be central and governed objects, essentially. So an example might be a rule, you know, checking the data quality. That same rule can be applied at point of entry during the create or change process of data. It can also be applied, you know, to identify exceptions on existing data, you know, for cleansing, for example. So the assessment will also serve to support your data governance, master data management, and data security strategies. You start communication and socializing of these concepts, if that doesn't already exist within the organization. You're identifying key stakeholders, data stewards, data owners, and other roles, you know, that are important prior to embarking, you know, on the program. And effectively, well, essentially, you cannot execute the data strategy effectively without those stakeholders being in place. You know, the risk is you end up with gaps, you end up with data that's not that's not conforming, you know, and then essentially you have challenges the later on you are in your program. You know, and in terms of security with these assessments, the data doesn't have to leave the business environment or systems. You know, we can assess it in place, and there's models built around that as well. So business owns the assessment as well. It's low cost, quick and insightful. There are reusable elements which provide a high potential return because of the reusability, and because of the accelerated approach, it means you know, typical assessments, you know, range. It's not months, you know, it's days or weeks that you're talking about. Maybe 1 to 4 weeks for general assessments, depending on the number of objects, and obviously if there are no delays and technical challenges. There's a lasting impact here. So the mechanisms built during the assessment or identified during the assessment, you know, these mechanisms measure and control data. They can be applied to assist business. in the various data solutions. And then the data strategy is an ever evolving thing. You know, these principles continuously inform the strategy, you know, with far-reaching impact way into the future. Okay, so as part of asking the why question, and I'm just going to take a short sidestep here. I need to go to PowerPoint. There we go. So just a short sidestep. So in order to understand the why of the data assessment, you know, we need to also look at what it is that will be assessed, which is data. One of the main areas of focus during the assessment specifically is then data quality. So from experience on a number of S/4HANA migration programs, Glue Data's opinion is that poor or unprepared data is one of the biggest risks to project timelines and delivery. You know, this seems to have become common knowledge based on feedback from other organizations and surveys. As you can see on the slide, migration projects are also specifically mentioned. You know, and there's a lot of cost overruns associated with these delays. So let's look at the impact of data quality specifically then on the S/4HANA project. You know, data is almost always an area of increasing concern and effort during the migration project. This is due to those escalating and complex dependencies. You know, the data cleansing and preparation requirements that come about like mid-cycle or immediately prior to even productive loads, when the business process and technical importance of the data is suddenly realized. You know, the data cannot technically even be loaded into the system because of those specific requirements. The data then first needs to be prepared. That can cause serious delays. Furthermore, you know, once the data migration project progresses to the realize or build phase, dependencies will shift from design activities onto the data activities and configuration, etc. So the data team, while executing the ETL process, may then need to deal with these data issues, you know, working with business, supporting business to fix the data issues, which reduces their capacity and then increases the risk once again. You know, proper testing is also cannot be completed without an adequate and accurate data set loaded to that relevant system or client. You know, and there are a number of other impacts and risks not highlighted here. You can go into a lot of detail, but I think those, you know, reasons make it quite clear that data does have a big impact on the migration project. You know, an example, just go back one, an example I can think of on a recent S/4HANA project at a company, the business delayed the preparation of their customer data for the production load. You know, so ignorance about these data requirements meant they sent dummy customer data, you know, which was used during the development cycle, you know, for load during the production cutover. I mean, data was loaded, and when presented with these sign-off reports, the business got a serious fright. You know, needless to say, this caused data integrity and reference issues and posed a massive risk to the project during the cutover. You know, the data loaded first had to be removed while business prepared the final data set, and before the load had to be done again. So had business understood and proactively owned and prepared their data, that issue could have been avoided quite easily, in fact. So ultimately, business must own its data and prioritize this stream within the S/4HANA roadmap. So in prioritization, think data preparation, cleansing, transformation, and that sort of thing. Okay. So by prioritizing the data within the roadmap, business can then reduce risk. But merely prioritizing is just one step in the right direction. You know, you need to consider other things, and you need to understand what it is that's being prioritized, how it will be executed, effort and time, responsibilities, and then strategic alignment, not just for the program, but also going forward. And this is then where the S/4HANA data readiness assessment comes in. Essentially, this readiness assessment would be completed before the S/4HANA program starts. So in saying that, you know, the question is when. We advocate that you start as soon as you think about going to S/4HANA. you know, obviously there'll be a lot of unknowns. You wouldn't know the scope of the project yet. You might not even know whether, you know, what the architecture looks like or the high level design, but that's okay. The assessment can be customized, you know, to look then specifically at standard requirements. You know, that gives you, SAP gives you a very good starting point with the various objects and content provided, so that you can at least cover, you know, 60 to 80% of the effort up front without knowing what the final design is going to be. The migration program can then easily deal with the delta. You know, it doesn't have to deal with 100% of the data requirement anymore. It can only then deal with the exceptions. Okay. So then in looking at the data assessment, you know, what is it? The glue data assessment methodology, you know, uses templates, repositories, pre-built elements. We use accelerators to facilitate workshops, and then system and industry knowledge. But that's all good and well. We cannot deliver an assessment without business involvement, and for that we need data stewards and subject matter experts, you know, to provide input into this process, into the assessment. So a general sequence of events we would follow here is to profile and analyze the data sets and the metadata. We want to identify preliminary and superficial areas of concern, you know, which will drive the conversation. We want to deal with the, you know, the 20% of the most important elements, which would then, using the Pareto principle, have an 80% impact on effort during the migration project. That's essentially the goal. It's not a catch-all. We're just dealing with the main and critical issues during the assessment. We further interrogate that data with support from the SAP functionals. You know, we need to understand configuration requirements in both, let's say if you're on an ECC environment or going to S4, those changes maybe in those versions. And then we need to better understand the business processes and the impact on data and vice versa. You know, there might be a standard process that exists, but practically speaking, that's not always the case. Some customization to process does occur at businesses, and I'm sure you guys will all relate. We then collaborate and workshop with the stakeholders. We define these business rules. During the discussions, we also unpack pain points, areas of concerns. We have frank conversations with people on the ground to get a feeling and a temperature gauge of data in general and processes in general. We measure and we try to categorize the data and processes and the impacts, further enhance reporting. You know, there's value in the categorization and in defining impacts, because all of a sudden, when it comes to reporting, you can immediately see you know, where the issues are, regardless of which view you take on the data. It adds several dimensions to the data model effectively. The accelerated approach also reduces the iterations and provides real-time results inside the workshops. It's so valuable when you put a rule up on the screen, you know, and project it, but you show the exceptions as well. You know, you'll find people say, oh, well, why is that data there? Or why that value should be excluded, you know, and then while you're reviewing the rule, you're tightening the rule at the same time. We then publish data quality scorecards and prepare the final assessment after that. This doesn't only contain data quality results, but also strategic guidance, recommendations, you know, other findings, and so forth. And then in executing the next steps or strategy, the products and artifacts developed during the assessment can be reused. And as I've mentioned, you know, examples of this would be the rules of master list for point of entry control or for data validation or cleansing, etc. Okay, so just to show you graphically just some of the inputs and outputs of the assessment, you know, on the source side, we're obviously looking at legacy data, or it will become legacy once you move into an S4 migration program. We need to understand the legacy data, and for that we need business input. There's obviously business and data rules. You know, these rules are unpacked then and defined as either a data rule, a process rule, a quality rule, governance related. It is our job then to translate those rules into technical rules we can then use during the assess and analyze phase of the process. Stakeholder collaboration is one of the most important elements here. And funnily, it seems to be one of the unique elements in Glue Data's assessment, because I mean, it provides the business rules, yes, but the way in which interaction with stakeholders is managed supports a number of activities and outputs, and has a number of additional benefits. You know, for example, better understanding individual processes and how they differ from the standard, you know, identifying skill levels of resources, training requirements, picking up any resistance or even ignorance in key positions, collecting user stories, you know, all of that is valuable input to plan a migration project. You know, you can gauge, you know, how much training is requirement, where the skill level, can the stakeholders own and manage the data that falls under their purview. Strategic decisions must also be considered during the assessment in order to dial in the focus. Is business considering a migration or a technical upgrade, for example? This will impact the data footprint in the legacy system. Also, transformation and conversion may become more tricky because it now needs to be done in place. For example, that will then feed into the data preparation strategy, which we'll chat about now. And let's say business wants to implement SuccessFactors or another HR system or another system after this migration program, then this may impact the review of, you know, financial objects, your charts of accounts, employee data, and that sort of thing. There's also architectural considerations that come out of that, and these all form part of the final report and recommendations for strategy. The products and outputs. So I've mentioned various outputs already. Key within the output is the reporting model. And you know, the reporting model is essentially a cube on which the reports can be built and customized based on these requirements. You know, this is only made available in the business landscape if the assessment is taken with a data quality management option, of course. Otherwise, it's just a once-off measurement. It's not it hasn't become a data quality management solution yet. There's still an implementation stage. But then data preparation is a natural follow-on or a progression from the assessment. It's part of the next steps, and most of the outputs, you know, can be reused in setting up the data preparation initiative, providing those guidelines, relevant principles, you know, to guide business in the execution thereof. Okay, so I hope that makes sense at a high level. You know, just an example of what your typical S4 HANA and data roadmap may look like post an assessment. Most businesses have this already, but just to show the impact of the assessment, you can see that it's got a direct impacts on your data preparation and your data migration strategy. In terms of preparation, there's obviously archiving solutions and migration prep. Data preparation provides, I mean, it's productive data that you're looking at, and that data effectively becomes the data set during your data migration. So, I mean, you're already getting your hands dirty way up front before the migration project even starts. And then post-migration, the assessment would, you know, provide inputs into those strategic solutions as well, including a data quality, MDM, data governance, and the like. The assessment does not detail all of those. It just provides, you know, key input and considerations. Okay, I'm just going to take you through a quick, you know, static demonstration of the typical process we go through in doing data assessments. You know, we come in, we prep, we set up, get access, we connect to the source data. We then extract metadata and structures to populate our data model we use for assessment. We identify key stakeholders and SMEs. You've heard that those are extremely important. We cannot do the assessment without them. And then we sort of, with the scope, it could be approached in various ways. You can have an object-based scope, such as data object, material, customer, vendor, etc., or maybe process-based, procurement, sales and distribution, and that sort of thing. Typically, we find the process-based approaches to be more the business of as usual type challenges, where you want a data quality management solution, rather than preparing for S/4HANA migration. S/4HANA migration data readiness looks at things like customer and vendor, conversion requirements, in moving to business partner, for example, and that sort of thing. We gather high-level strategic design and architecture info. We need to know sort of the when, where, who, and how of the migration. If it's not known, as I said, it's not a train smash. We can already get a lot of value out of just doing the assessment based on standards, industry standards, standard business practice, etc. We then prepare those data structures according to the above information we've gathered. It includes our templates, initial rules. As I mentioned, we have large rules repository we can reference. There's default and dynamic reports that we use for workshop purposes, and the list goes on. Okay, so we then analyze. This is a bit of data mining as well. We profile first of all, and then we report on these stats. It's data volumes, the distribution thereof. We look for specific patterns. A lot of this is also based on what we've seen across multiple customers and projects. And then that input we present in the gathering of the rules. We also present what we term rules thinking. It's a way of going about defining a business rule. We also find that different businesses look at rules in different ways. A rule is not then always translatable to a technical or data rule, then a challenge for us. Basically, the easiest approach next step would be just to navigate the SAP transactions on objects, go through the fields, and then define rules for those fields. This is then looking specifically at data quality, essentially we throw up the exceptions on the screen, as I said, and that helps tighten the rule. We also classify the data and rules. Now, this is the dimensionality I was talking about. We look at business area and processes impact, and we look at the level of impact and risk, and you'll see that on the dashboard in the next couple of slides. So an example of a rule, you might ask, and how that rule informs strategy. Now, that's specifically what I want to focus on, because remember, the assessment is not about cleaning. The assessment is about informing the strategy. So if we look at your material master and we look at a material status, we have a full data set, which is effectively without any preparation or cleansing. That is our full scope, potentially, for data migration or for the upgrade, because that data would remain in place. We would then want to classify the data according to material status, but we need a rule to tell us what the status is. So you can see an active material is not flagged for deletion and not blocked for trading, which means in the system, anybody can go and procure or start trading with that material. A dormant material is a material that's technically active in the system, but it just hasn't been used anywhere in a while. We find with the new digital transformation programs, you might have a data creation or data governance or MDM solution managing your material creation or change workflow, which means that you can safely, flag that data for deletion. And if it needs to trade in the next few months, there's an onboarding or a creation process that's governed and controlled that you can then use, and that will ensure your data accuracy. Inactive data is obviously data that's been flagged for deletion, or a status is set to some sort of blocked or non-trading type, type status. Okay, so in looking at the active data, you can see that when comparing the active versus the dormant and inactive, you can start to soft split the scope, essentially. So looking at the right-hand side at the bottom, your dormant materials, a decision can be made to go and flag those for deletion. You're dealing with a data redundancy. All that data is active in the system. You're reporting on it potentially. It's potentially sort of making processes and operations quite complex. There can be confusion. There's duplication of data. So you can deal with that by dealing with the data redundancy, identifying the ones you can flag for deletion, and that provides an opportunity to archive pre-migration or to archive and delete, if you're doing an upgrade. Essentially, that data does not need to be cleansed or prepared. So you see how we've excluded a chunk of data now from the effort in the strategy for data preparation and for migration by extension. And then the active data is effectively our scope of data. It's the volume of data that we need to deal with. It's our future data footprint. So that's quite important when looking at your entire system. Let's say you're looking at, a cloud-based platform, or, S/4HANA in the cloud. Memory becomes expensive. It might, that might impact your licensing agreement. So you can see that there's far-reaching effects here that you can glean, from this assessment. The preparation and transform effort is then reduced and can be defined. Okay. So very simply, this is an actual scorecard, or a little bar graph from a customer that we've recently done an assessment for. 70% of the data is dormant. And in discussion, it seems like that 70% can all be flagged for deletion. Can you imagine reducing your effort by 70% just on one data object? Material is very complex. You've got all sorts of complexity in your MRP processes, for example, if you're a manufacturer. And that really does have a meaningful material, excuse the pun, impact on timelines and efforts. This is an example of a classification rule. I just wanted to make that clear. So we are classifying the data, and that adds a dimension. So when we look at a data quality rule, for example, this rule is validating an MRP field. The quality of the field will have a direct impact on, let's say, the procurement process. There's a number of them, but let's say procurement, because order quantities might be incorrect. This rule can be extended by saying the rounding must be set for raw materials with external procurement, i.e. materials we're purchasing from a supplier, for active materials only. Do you see how we can now go and apply the rule to only a subset of the data, because we've added a dimension there. We define then the data quality rule. We specify which business areas or processes are affected, and then we say what is the impact or risk to those areas and processes. Is there and then we can consider the impact of changes, or in dealing with the data quality issue. You can't just go and update values. You can't just go to your MMO2 transaction and start making changes. Sometimes these changes have a process behind them. There's stock impacts, there's financial impacts, there's process impacts as well. So is there existing process for that specific change? Think of a unit of measure change, for example. You're holding stock against one unit of measure. I can't just go and change it. There's a whole process around making that change. So will that affect open transactions, production orders, and how will it impact reporting? These are all considerations that come out of the classification of these rules. Okay. This is an example of a dashboard. So for each rule, we build this dashboard. It seems very simple, but it's proven very effective in workshops. You can see the list of exceptions on the right-hand side in the table. You can, at a high level and just at a glance, see exactly where the impacts are and the level of those impacts. Okay. You can see some volumes and that sort of thing. So it's all just a valuable input. And as I mentioned, these can all be customized. We can add as much detail as required here, but this is your typical starting point.
And Ben, this is a live report. You can draw down,
yes,
slice and dice as you go along.
So that data access, we like to use, like to host our model on HANA, for example, which means that we can use smart data access, point that to your production client that's read-only, and it's live. So as soon as you make a change to either the rule or the data, you simply just refresh the report. It's very dynamic. There's no go back, update the report, run changes, come back the next day, review. find some more changes, go back. Those iterations are reduced considerably.
And this tool can be used as an ongoing tool once an account is live on SAP.
100%. So, as I mentioned before, this can then transition into your data quality management solution. So, Information Steward is another tool we like to use for the measurement of data quality. That might not be available. You might not have a license. We can use your standard database technologies to deliver this type of functionality. And all that remains is the implementation thereof technically within the business's environment. And then there's users and roles that are set up, and you can use that day to day. Okay, once that's done, we generate reports and then review. So we look at those results and exceptions. We can tighten the rules or parameters. I mean, you can imagine that, for the dormant material, we were looking at material that hasn't traded in the last X amount of months. But let's say that's 12 months or 24 months because it might be seasonal. You can change those trading dates and it will immediately spit out a different set of exceptions. Parameters you can add and tighten. So you can also add dimensions and change where the rule is specifically applied. I don't want to apply every rule to every single record in my system, right? Some rules are meant only for customers, but they might only be meant for local trading customers and not internal customers. For example, employees that are also customers in my my system. So, it can work both ways, and I think that's a very important principle to keep in mind. We then want sign-off. Okay, so as I said, these rules are, it's 20% of the effort to cover 80%, of the potential benefit. So the sign-off is just so that we can draw a line under the assessment. Those rules are handed over to business, and they can then obviously be changed from then on going forward. We also look at patterns and these results by business area and process. This is quite valuable as well, because ownership is not always very clearly defined. So by looking at both the technical views, like the object views, and the process views, overlaying those with each other, it does support your data governance and data quality management elements of ownership and stewardship, that sort of thing. Okay. We also then identify and report any additional anomalies and findings. We had an example where at a customer where they hold insurance cover against the customer's account. So the customer goes through a credit control process. Let's say the customer has insurance cover for R1 million. Essentially, that is then held against the customer's account in ECC, and in the report, it should show then when that customer exceeds, their balance exceeds the cover, because essentially that means the business is at risk. Okay, if that customer doesn't pay, the insurance won't cover the debt. Okay, so that was just an example of something that came about in the assessment, and I mean there are many more, but that's a serious risk, to the company, a financial risk, and that would inform the strategy as well. Yeah. Okay, I think if we can just go to the next one. This is an example of all the rules in the various areas. Okay, they're consolidated. This is a dynamic drillable report. This can again be tweaked to show certain views. By clicking on a specific one of these areas, you can see the business area, you can see which impacts, which processes are impacted, for example. And this is just a Power BI report, the Power BI dashboard, but the dashboarding can be done in whichever front end or visualization tool business has available. All of this information is then rolled up into sort of an exec summary. You can see we've got our main classification data on the left-hand side, the active dormant view. You can see that basically sells a cleanup or preparation strategy to business, because they can see 70% of that data can potentially be, and even more because there's inactive data, can potentially be excluded from any future, programs. We then break it down by business area, so we can see, for example, there's an issue in receiving, and this then needs to be substantiated by the people on the ground. If we know which fields we've covered and looked at, they must say, yes, I'm experiencing a problem, at the door when the supplier arrives with a truck XYZ. So it just points you in the right direction to go and unpack exactly what those issues are. And then the index is quite important. Sorry, John. The index is quite important here. It's an indication, and it takes into account a number of factors. It's not only data quality. It's also complexity and expected effort. Okay, so let's say this was an index for customer and vendor, but you, for example, don't have adequate address detail. Then we know that there's going to be considerable manual effort to enrich those customer and vendor records with the address data so that I can do my business partner conversion and consolidate customers and vendors into a single business partner, essentially. Okay. So yeah, in closing, we then present all of these findings, highlight the areas of concern. Importantly, we present the next steps or recommendations for the data preparation. As I said, this is a natural progression. Specifically, we give detail around data redundancy, what needs to be considered for archiving, the data preparation landscape and the strategy thereof. That's all documented and can then, as a next step, be refined by business if they choose to go ahead with that. And then the data migration strategy can be kicked off, and the insights gathered from the assessment. And then if the data quality management solution is put in place, is the data migration strategy immediately has a view of the end-to-end data set, and then can define scope. And then based on that scope, that drives the data migration within your S/4HANA conversion going forward. We then prioritize the data to be prepared or cleansed. We, for example, look at the top 10 largest customers, fix their issues, because in dealing with those top 10 customers, if they account for 40 or 50% of your turnover, you've reduced your financial risk considerably there. And this is the whole 80-20 principle we like to stick to with assessments. It's not an exact science.
And of course, Ben, the more time that you have to clean your dates before, for example, S/4HANA go live, the better.
Exactly. So that's why I said, we'd like to do an assessment even when you start thinking about when somebody mentions the word S/4HANA, you want to do an assessment. And if you embed this, then it means that you can continuously assess, as you go.
Even post go live.
Okay, well, I think that's it from me. Time for Q&A.
Thank you very much, Ben. That was definitely some food for thoughts in terms of your current data and how you're going to drive it going forward. So thank you very much. We've got a second power bank up for grabs. So again, if you've got any questions, please just say your name and go ahead. Nathan, it may be your lucky day where you can win 2 power banks.
Hi, Jono. This is Tandy here.
Hi, Tandy.
Jono, my question is based on, remember when you moved to S/4HANA, you need to use business partners. So in case where your address details on customers and vendors in your area where you didn't have a consolidated business partner, you have separate customer and you have separate vendor. The address details is totally different. Is it going to be a business rule to make the decision based on which address to go ahead with, or what?
Okay, so there's a couple of things to consider here, and I'm sort of gonna answer your question by taking a little bit of a detour. So there are technical business partner conversion tools available as well, which would essentially pull in both those data sets, figure out the consolidation, and attempt to automatically do that for you. I don't have a lot of experience with that, but in saying that, when you do your conversion and consolidation from customer and vendor to BP, we obviously know what is the critical data that determines uniqueness. We then do probability matching, for example, across customers and vendors, and that gets presented back to business to make the final decision on which is, the, for lack of a better term, golden record, okay, and which would become the master. Business partner is a tricky one. It is a complex object and it does require a lot of effort, but by simplifying the process in enabling business to make those decisions quickly, we feel that you can actually get there in the same amount of time or faster with less effort, essentially. So the rules would be around the quality of those unique fields, the fields that allow unique identification. Don't know if I've answered your question.
Not really, but yeah.
I suppose, Sani, it's really up to the business to make the call on what fields. I mean, Ben mentioned a golden record. So if you are combining three vendors and you're combining customers into a BP, I mean, the business needs to decide on the correct address. I think what Ben is saying is he's creating a framework that can assist business in making that call. So as opposed to having a manual process where it's in Excel or paper-based, we can build a solution where you can have match a review and select the correct field based on a call a business makes.
So essentially, let's say
what I meant is that in the likes of environment where customers and vendors were separate, yes, I will build my customer with a different address and then do the purchasing with a different address for the vendor. This is what I mean. So
yeah.
Excuse me, from my thinking. Okay.
Go ahead.
My thinking is at some point we might need to contact either the supplier or the customer in terms of that, but then the customer, we might not really have to, it's going to be difficult to convince them to change their billing address. In terms of the supplier, it can be possible, but this is my question basically. How do we then marry the two into business partner?
I think for that, it sounds like, you might need to just look at the business partner object and the different roles, effectively partner profiles, different parties you can have, in a business partner. There is a one-to-many relationship there. So you can still specify, for example, your payers and your bill to, your ship to, those types of addresses and contacts. You can still do that. But if you have a ECC system that's configured to have those roles as separate customer accounts, I still need to consolidate them. I might have 3 accounts for the same customer because they fulfill different roles, right? So, and those need to be, number one, consolidated into one business partner, but then split out again so that I can have those roles maintained.
Ben, does Johan here?
Good, Johan.
So sorry, Johan, can I just quickly, Tandy, what company are you phoning from?
John, no, this is Tandy from BCX.
Okay, thanks. Tandy. Thank you.
Sorry, Johan, just before you say that, Tandy, you mentioned the manual effort there of contacting the supplier or the customer. That's the key thing here. That's the risk.
Wow.
You can't do that. If you do that during the migration process, you could possibly run into issues because that takes time.
Yeah.
You have to pick up the phone. You see what I'm saying? So by doing a preparation exercise, by assessing what that gap is and doing a preparation exercise, you can deal with that before the migration project starts. And that's what we're saying. So we understand that there's complexity. We just want to reduce the risk.
Thank you.
Okay. Johan, you had something to add?
Well, I just want to add something on your comments. Partner functions is one of the solutions. And the other solution is that you can use different addresses on a business partner. So there are multiple ways to resolve an issue like that. And it is just in the conversation with the customer, how you're going to resolve an issue like that. That's all.
Thanks, Sean. Are there any other questions?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
So if you're looking at a case where you have your finance and your HR on 2 separate boxes, and you convert S4HANA on the finance box, will this affect the ALEs that feed through to finance from HR?
Well, I guess I need to ask if your finance, your chart of accounts, your GL, all of that is going to change in the move to S4. Because if it changes, then yes, I mean, things need to be remapped. So effectively that your postings might be affected there, you know, and you need to look at those, the integration and the interfaces between the two. You know, that's a very simple answer to that question.
But Ben, it is true, if I can say so, because finance on S/4HANA uses completely different tables and structures.
Yeah.
Okay, so then what you're saying is it uses completely different tables and structures, and the ALE are feeding to those tables. So how is it not going to be affected? So
No,
the ALEs must change?
Yeah, so that's the answer is yes, it is affected.
Okay.
Correct, yeah.
Sorry, Gwen, what company are you phoning from? Or are you from?
From EPSA.
Good stuff. Yeah, I think for me, the important thing there is that needs to be reviewed and designed, you know, those changes. You know, in order to understand what they would entail, you need to understand what the structures look like in S4, first of all. And then you can measure, you know, where you're going from and where you need to go to.
So
that allows you to redesign more accurately, effectively.
So is there somewhere a person can look that up on the internet to see what those
Gwen, what we can do,
restructures entail?
We can take this offline. I'm just a bit aware of time. We can take this offline.
Okay.
We can contact you outside of this forum, and we can have a conversation around your question in a bit more detail.
And we can send
Okay
you
then.
some reference material. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. Any other questions? Great. Well, Tandy and Gwen, thank you very much for those questions. I think just because both of those questions were detailed and there was some thinking around those, we'll send you both a power bag for that. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
So just to pleasure. So just to emphasize what we said at the start of the session, all presentations will be saved on the Afsorg webpage, and there is a recording of today's webinar that will also be saved. So again, thank you very much for your time, and please, everybody stay healthy, stay strong, and we look forward to you attending our next webinar in the next few months. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.